The young black waitress watches in frozen terror as two billionaire kids, forgotten by their parents, struggle for air in the deep end of a glittering pool. The screams of onlookers fill the air, but no one moves, paralyzed by shock. In a split second, she makes a choice that will change her life forever. A choice that will expose a family's darkest secrets and ignite a war she never asked to fight. She dives in, not knowing that this act of heroism is about to make her the target of a powerful man who will stop at nothing to bury the truth. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Elias Maeve was 23 years old, and she lived a life carved out of sheer exhaustion. She was a pre-med student during the day and a server at the illustrious Ocean Crest Country Club by night, which meant sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her uniform, crisp and white, felt like a constant reminder of the class divide that separated her from the members she served, the people who ordered $100 bottles of wine without a second glance. Her goal wasn't wealth, only stability for her little brother, Jude. He needed a good school and a sister who wasn't constantly running ragged, constantly on the brink of collapse. Elias was his anchor. That Friday afternoon, the heat was suffocating, even near the shimmering, turquoise infinity pool. Elias was clearing discarded linen napkins from Cabana when the screams started. Not the happy shouts of children, but the frantic, breathless terror of adults realizing they had lost control of the world. She dropped her tray of glasses. The sound of shattering crystal was instantly swallowed by the sheer noise of panic. The Lockwoods' cabana was empty, their 4- and 6-year-old sons, Knox and Aspen, nowhere to be seen, having slipped away in a moment of parental distraction. The pool was divided into deep and shallow ends, but the children were far from the steps, struggling against the water that only minutes before had been their joyful playground. The adult pool attendant, Mr. Vance, a nervous man in his 60s, was paralyzed on the edge, pointing uselessly. Nobody moved fast enough. The mothers nearby were screaming, but not diving in. Elias didn't hesitate. She didn't even kick off her shoes, knowing that every second lost was a life gone. Her adrenaline spiked, fueled by a memory too raw to process from her own childhood, a memory of cold water and helplessness. The water was shockingly cold, a brief sting against her skin before the familiar weight of panic settled in her chest. She reached Knox first, the older boy, who was flailing wildly, pushing her down as much as she tried to pull him up. He was heavier than he looked, soaked in expensive pool water and fear. She had to fight him, quickly wrapping her arm around his waist, before scanning the blue depths for his younger brother, Aspen, who had already sunk below the surface. The entire world was reduced to the sharp, chemical smell of chlorine and the thunderous beat of her own heart. Aspen was near the bottom, a small, still shadow in the deep end. The sight of his slack body was an anchor of pure terror in her chest, but Elias pushed the emotion down. She kicked hard, pulling Knox's resisting weight toward the surface, taking one gasping breath, and then going under again immediately. She was running out of air, the edges of her vision already fading to gray. This was the moment that separates people, she thought, the ones who watch and the ones who act, regardless of the cost to their own life. She grabbed the small child and shoved both boys towards the light. When she finally stumbled out onto the deck, soaked and trembling, the Lockwoods were there. Thurston Lockwood, the banking tycoon, was already yelling into his phone, his face blotchy with fury, not relief. Cordelia, his immaculately dressed wife, snatched Aspen from Elias's arms without a word of thanks, checking the child over as if Elias's hands were somehow dirty or poisonous. The scene was pure, cold, public fury, the kind only the very rich can afford to display when they are embarrassed. Who authorized you to enter the members' pool? Thurston bellowed, his voice carrying over the frantic cries of the children and the sudden, uneasy silence of the club guests. He wasn't asking if his sons were okay. He was asking for her papers. This is a violation of club rules. You cause a scene, you could have scratched the marble, and you're covered in that dirty creek water from the marsh. You put my children at risk by touching them. Elias stood there, dripping, feeling the full weight of his contempt, the cold calculation in his eyes. He saw a server who broke the rules, not a person who saved his children's lives. He was more concerned with maintaining the illusion of order and superiority than acknowledging a debt of gratitude. Cordelia nodded silently, her gaze skating over Elias as if she were inspecting a piece of broken furniture, the picture of condescending scorn. The insult was sharper than any blade of ice. "I saved your sons," Elias whispered, her voice rough from the exertion and the sudden, chilling cold that followed the adrenaline crash. But Thurston wasn't listening. He was signaling Mr. Stern, the club manager, who hurried over, already sweating with anxiety. Thurston pointed a stiff, accusing finger directly at Elias, his wedding band flashing in the sun. "Get this woman off the property. She's fired, and I want the security footage destroyed immediately, so this little incident never happened." Elias didn't move, her eyes locking on Thurston's. She realized he wasn't just protecting his reputation. He was trying to bury the truth of his own failure as a parent, projecting it onto her. He wanted to erase the inconvenient heroism of a waitress, turning her into a criminal. But before Stern could grab her arm, Elias noticed something small and white drifting near the pool filter, something the Lockwoods clearly hoped would be gone by morning. It was a half-empty prescription bottle with a strange, unfamiliar name on the label, catching the light perfectly. The prescription bottle was a tiny, damning piece of plastic, swirling slowly toward the filter grate. Elias knew if she pointed it out, Thurston would destroy it, denying its existence. She had to act. As Mr. Stern, the club manager, reached for her, muttering nervous apologies about the disturbance, Elias casually stumbled. Her knee hit the side of the deck, and with a practiced, seamless movement, her hand scooped up the bottle and tucked it into the soaking wet pocket of her white apron, all before hitting the ground with a convincing groan of pain. The Lockwoods barely registered her fall. They were too busy managing the optics. Thurston was still commanding Mr. Stern to expedite the firing process, his voice low but sharp with menace. Cordelia, meanwhile, was holding a hysterical Knox and shooing away the few guests who dared to watch the ugly scene unfold. The sight of her own children nearly drowned was already fading behind the veil of wealthy pride and a deep desire for instant, total privacy. They just wanted the problem, Elias, gone. Elias was hauled into the manager's office, a cramped, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Mr. Stern, a man whose spine had been softened by years of serving the elite, didn't look her in the eye. He spoke in a tired, resigned monotone about the bylaws, the liability risks, and the non-negotiable demands of high-level patrons. He said her act of heroism was commendable, but her failure to obey the rules was unacceptable. It was the purest form of betrayal. As Stern droned on about her severance pay, a paltry 2 weeks' wage that wouldn't cover half her rent, Elias felt the plastic vial digging into her thigh. She pulled it out when Stern turned to fetch the termination papers. The label was peeling from the chlorine, but the name was clear, Dorian Nash. It was a heavy-duty sedative, not something typically prescribed to the Lockwoods children. But who was Dorian Nash? The name held no weight, no recognition in her mind, yet it felt heavy with secrets. The less extreme moment came as she stared at the prescription details, a sudden, blinding insight into the family dynamics she had always observed from afar. Thurston and Cordelia were always impeccably dressed, always together, but always distant. A marriage of business and superficial image. They paid for the best nannies, the best schools, the best security. They bought peace, but they never bought real attention. The near drowning was not an accident of the pool. It was an accident of neglect. She knew this feeling well. When her own mother passed away, the grief was so consuming that her father had started relying on a string of nannies, sinking into his own quiet despair. Elias had been forced to become the parent to Jude at 16. The Lockwoods had all the money in the world to buy help, but their children were drowning in plain sight, just like she and Jude almost had years ago. The memory solidified her resolve. She wouldn't let them walk away unpunished for their carelessness. Stern slid the termination papers across the desk. "Sign this, Elias. It's for the best." Thurston Lockwood will make sure you never work in this town again if you don't. His voice was thin, a sound of defeat. Elias looked at the document, the formal language designed to silence her, and then down at the bottle in her palm, a weapon of truth. She could take the severance and disappear, or she could fight a battle she couldn't afford to lose. Elias didn't sign. Instead, she asked one simple, loaded question. Who is Dorian Nash? And why was his sedative bottle floating in the members' pool, the only thing nearby when the kids went in? Stern's face, already pale, instantly drained of all color. He stammered, denying any knowledge, his eyes darting to the locked safe in the corner of the office, but it was too late. The name had clearly hit a nerve, shattering his veneer of tired compliance. That's absurd, Elias. You're making things up to leverage a better deal, he whispered fiercely, his eyes wide with fear. Sign the paper and leave. I'm giving you a warning. You don't want to cross the Lockwoods. They have lawyers who specialize in ruining people like you. He grabbed the phone to call security, a nervous, desperate gesture designed to end the conversation. As security escorted her, wet uniform and all, out the back service door, the truth hit Elias with the force of tidal wave. Dorian Nash wasn't a family member. He was the Lockwoods' personal, live-in security specialist, a man who was supposed to be watching the children. Elias pulled the prescription bottle out, the scent of chlorine strong in the Florida sun, and read the label again. This bottle was only filled 3 days ago and was already almost empty, which meant Dorian Nash was heavily medicated, perhaps even passed out, while Knox and Aspen nearly drowned. The realization that the Lockwoods were covering up the negligence of a heavily medicated employee was a shock so profound it made Elias's head spin. She found herself standing on the curb outside the club's perimeter wall, the damp uniform sticking to her skin, holding the evidence of a conspiracy she never asked for. This wasn't just about a job. It was a clear case of obstruction designed to protect the Lockwood name and their insurance liability, using her as the scapegoat. Elias walked 4 miles back to her small, overheated apartment above a laundromat, the weight of the waterlogged sedative bottle feeling heavier than any gold. The heat of the concrete was a familiar burn under her feet, a stark contrast to the pampered lawns of Ocean Crest. This long, painful walk gave her time to think, to let the rage cool into a hard, strategic plan. She wouldn't go to the police. They would simply dismiss her word against the Lockwoods' high-priced legal team. She needed leverage. The less extreme part of the afternoon involved Jude. When she finally stumbled into the apartment, her little brother, Jude, was doing his homework at their kitchen table, his bright, earnest face full of concentration. He was 8 years old, smart, and totally reliant on her. The sight of him, safe and sound, was her reason. Years ago, Jude had slipped away from their father in a public park, and a stranger had saved him. That stranger was the reason Elias had learned to swim so fiercely. She owed the universe this debt. She quickly changed into dry clothes, the memory of her near drowning fading behind the urgent need to protect their future. She made Jude a simple dinner, pretending the day had been uneventful, but her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The Lockwoods weren't just powerful, they were ruthless. If they knew she had the bottle, they would crush her, making sure she couldn't even afford community college. But she couldn't let them keep paying their way out of consequences. Elias decided her best chance was exposure. Thurston Lockwood's entire empire was built on a reputation for moral integrity and flawless execution. A scandal involving the near death of his own children due to an incapacitated security guard would be a devastating blow to his financial standing and his carefully constructed public image. She needed to hit him where his armor was the thinnest, his wallet. She used the communal computer at the library the next morning, carefully researching the name Dorian Nash. It took hours, but she found a local, private security company that Nash was once affiliated with, a company that had a history of covering up accidents for rich clients. The rabbit hole was deeper and murkier than she had first imagined. She realized that Thurston Lockwood didn't just fire Nash. He had probably paid him a massive settlement to disappear entirely. Elias felt a surge of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, righteous anger. She was just a waitress, but she had the truth, and she had the evidence. She took a picture of the pill bottle's label with her cheap cell phone and sent it, anonymously, to a local investigative reporter named Shelby Rourke, known for her aggressive and sometimes reckless pursuit of celebrity scandals. The message was simple: check the Ocean Crest pool incident. Ask about Dorian Nash. But the Lockwoods were already 3 steps ahead. As Elias left the library, her phone rang, showing an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but a prickling sense of dread made her answer. The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and utterly chilling. Thurston Lockwood himself. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I know you have a bottle, Elias. I know you know about Dorian. You're trying to blackmail me, and that is a mistake." "I haven't asked for anything," Elias shot back, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "I just want you to admit what happened." Thurston chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Admissions are for Sunday school, child. I just called your university's financial aid department. You seem to have misplaced a key signature on your scholarship application, and it looks like your entire tuition for next semester is now frozen. Drop the bottle off at my office by noon, or your brother, Jude, will have to drop out of his magnet school next week. I own the donor. Your future is my toy." The line went dead, leaving Elias standing on the pavement, the receiver hot against her ear, trembling not from fear, but from the brutal realization of Thurston's power. He hadn't just fired her. He had reached into her life and ripped out the very foundation of her future and, worse, her brother's. The news about the frozen tuition and the threat to Jude's magnet school was a punch to the stomach, a moment of genuine, paralyzing despair. He knew exactly what she cared about and targeted it with surgical precision. Elias walked aimlessly for a long time, the threat echoing in her mind. Dropping the bottle was easy. Fighting was impossible. How could a waitress stand against a man who could manipulate university officials and school donors with a single phone call? The hopelessness was a physical weight pressing her shoulders down. She briefly considered leaving the state, starting over somewhere else, but that was just cowardice, a betrayal of the promise she had made to her younger self. The less extreme event came as a small, unexpected reprieve. She found herself outside a small, unassuming garden supply store near the bus stop. As she leaned against a brick wall, watching the traffic, a groundskeeper from the country club, an older man named Silas, who only ever spoke to her in brief Spanish greetings, stepped out, carrying a heavy bag of mulch. He saw her, stopped, and looked around carefully, making sure no one else was watching. Silas didn't speak about the incident directly, but his eyes held an unmistakable pity, a silent recognition of her plight. He simply walked over and slipped a crumpled piece of paper into her hand as he pretended to adjust the collar of her jacket. "La verdad no es ahoga," he murmured, the old Spanish saying meaning, "The truth does not drown." Then he quickly walked away without another word. The interaction was quiet, quick, and almost invisible, a single thread of human kindness in a web of cruelty. When Elias unfolded the paper, it wasn't a warning or a contact number. It was a single, tiny hand-drawn map of the Ocean Crest Country Club's grounds, marked with a red X near the perimeter fence behind the main generator shed. Below the X, Silas had scribbled 2 words, "the bench." It was a cryptic clue, suggesting something else was hidden there, maybe something else the Lockwoods had discarded, a second, more powerful piece of evidence. This small act of defiance by Silas, the groundskeeper, reignited a spark of fight in Elias. Thurston Lockwood had thrown down the gauntlet, but he had underestimated her. He thought money could buy silence and obedience, but she realized that the world wasn't only made up of billionaires. It was also made up of people like Silas, the invisible workers who see everything and carry all the secrets. The threat to Jude was the point of no return. Elias decided to go on the offensive. The Lockwoods' lawsuit threat was just a bluff to panic her into submission. She had to counter that bluff with raw truth. She took a bus across town to the newspaper office, carrying the pill bottle in a small, seal bag. She was done waiting for the Lockwoods to make their next move. She was going to make hers. If Thurston wanted a war, he would get one, but it would be fought on her terms, not his. She finally met the reporter, Shelby Rourke, in a crowded, noisy coffee shop across from the newspaper building. Shelby was younger than Elias expected, with a sharp, cynical gaze that missed nothing. Elias presented the evidence, the full story, the dismissal, the threat, and the pill bottle with Dorian Nash's name. Shelby listened intently, nodding slowly, her eyes fixed on the prescription vial as if it were a rare diamond. "This is huge, Elias," Shelby said, her voice dropping low and intense. "But if you go public, the Lockwoods will not just try to ruin you. They will succeed. They will dig up everything, your dad's bankruptcy, your college loans, maybe even twist that story about Jude years ago. We have to be airtight. They will sue us both for criminal defamation, and that lawsuit will cost more than you or I will make in 10 years. You can end up in jail." Elias looked at the bottle, then at the map Silas had given her, and then at Shelby. The choice was clear: risk everything for justice, or live a small, safe life under the Lockwood's thumb. She had nothing left to lose except her honor. The fight had become personal, a matter of principle. She looked Shelby straight in the eye and simply nodded. The agreement was made. Elias would provide the evidence, and Shelby would break the story, simultaneously hitting the Lockwoods in the press and in court. But before they could shake on it, Elias's phone buzzed with an email alert. It wasn't a denial from the university. It was a scanned legal document. Thurston Lockwood had already filed a massive defamation lawsuit against Elias Maeve, naming her and any unnamed co-conspirators. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. the very next morning. The clock had just started ticking. The legal papers were a masterpiece of intimidation. 50 pages of dense, jargon-filled text alleging defamation, emotional distress, and extortion. The demand for damages was astronomical, designed not to win, but to bankrupt and terrify. The realization that Thurston had moved faster than she could have imagined sent a fresh wave of ice-cold panic through Elias. The hearing wasn't a distant threat. It was a ticking clock set to go off in less than 12 hours. Shelby Rourke, the reporter, swore under her breath, her initial enthusiasm turning into grim determination. "He's trying to crush the story before it breathes. This is a classic Lockwood tactic. They weaponized the court system." She explained that they couldn't publish the exposé before the hearing without giving Thurston's lawyers more ammunition. They needed a witness, a second piece of evidence, something so undeniable that the judge couldn't ignore it. The less extreme, grounding moment of the night was Elias's brief return home. She found Jude asleep on the sofa, a history textbook splayed open on his chest. His small, peaceful face was a reminder of the life she was fighting for. She carefully moved the book, covered him with a quilt, and sat beside him for a long time, drawing strength from his innocence. This wasn't just about the Lockwood's children. It was about ensuring her own brother never had to depend on the mercy of people like them. She looked at the little map Silas had given her. The bench. It was the only thing that offered a glimmer of hope outside of Shelby's risky strategy. While Shelby spent the night trying to find a high-powered, pro bono lawyer willing to stand up to the Lockwoods, Elias decided to follow the cryptic clue. She had to find out what Thurston wanted to hide at the bench, knowing that if she was caught trespassing, she would be handed straight over to the police, with the defamation suit as irrefutable proof of her intent. Under the faint light of a crescent moon, Elias climbed the 6-foot perimeter wall of the Ocean Crest Country Club, feeling less like a former waitress and more like a thief in a spy movie. The silence of the exclusive grounds was heavy, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant, muffled sound of the ocean. She hugged the shadows, navigating the vast, manicured lawns toward the maintenance area marked with an X on the groundskeeper's crude map. The generator shed was huge and silent, a concrete block hidden behind thick hedges. Just beyond it, she spotted it, a simple, weathered wooden bench, facing the marsh, completely out of sight of the clubhouses and the main pool. It was where the workers probably took their breaks, a place where the rich never ventured. She felt along the wood, her heart pounding against her ribs, looking for something tucked away, something small and easily missed. Nothing. Just old, splintered wood. Elias felt a wave of crushing defeat. Had Silas sent her on a wild goose chase? Was it a joke? She was about to give up when she noticed something strange. The bench wasn't just old, it was hollow. Beneath the seat, a section of the wood was held in place not by nails, but by two small, rusting, barely visible screws. She used the edge of a forgotten credit card from her wallet to pry the small piece loose, her hands shaking with anticipation. Inside the hollow space, wrapped in plastic and tucked away securely, was a small, dusty digital recorder. It looked old and cheap, the kind of device a minimum wage worker would use to record important notes. It had a single, clearly marked file on it. Elias's breath caught in her throat. She pressed the play button, holding the tiny recorder to her ear in the dead silence of the night. The recording was clear, containing the sound of loud, drunken argument from the previous day. It was Thurston Lockwood's voice, slurring his words, berating Dorian Nash, the security guard. Thurston was clearly arguing about money, shouting about a final payment. Then the sound of a violent, heavy shove, followed by a sickening thud and a desperate, muffled cry, and the chilling, definitive click of a door being locked from the outside. The final, extreme event was captured perfectly. A sound of Thurston Lockwood, not only neglecting his children, but possibly committing a serious felony right before the drowning, and someone else was now missing. If you're still enjoying this story, share this video with someone that needs to watch this video. So what exactly did Elias find on that recorder? What does this audio mean for a fight against the Lockwoods? Let's find out. The tiny recording was a thunderclap in the dark, a truth so much bigger and uglier than she had ever imagined. The muffled argument between Thurston and a man she could only assume was Dorian Nash was about money. But it wasn't a business deal. Thurston was screaming about a betrayal, about a stolen list, and about a final payment that had been missed. The argument escalated fast, ending in a violent shove and a muffled cry. The thud that followed was a sickening sound, like a body hitting a hard surface, followed by a heavy, metallic slam. Elias listened to it again and again, her heart pounding. It was the sound of a door being locked. This wasn't just a case of parental neglect or a bad employee. This was assault, possibly worse. Thurston Lockwood didn't just let his children nearly drown. He had physically harmed the man who was supposed to be watching them, and then he had locked him up somewhere. Elias met with Shelby, the reporter, and the pro bono lawyer Anya Sharma the next morning. Anya was a small, sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense attitude and a reputation for taking on impossible cases. She listened to the recording, her face a mask of stone. When the audio finished, she simply took a deep, weary breath. "This is a game changer, Elias," Anya said, her voice low. "It's proof of a crime, but it's also a liability. Without a second witness, a judge could rule it inadmissible, saying it was a doctored fake. It's too convenient." Anya explained that this recording made things more dangerous, not less. The defamation suit Thurston had filed was just the beginning. Now that Elias had proof of a felony, Thurston's legal team would use every resource to destroy her, no matter the cost. They would go after her credibility, her family, and her entire life until she was a broken mess who couldn't even afford to show up in court. They would claim she manufactured the recording to get rich from the Lockwoods. Elias felt a moment of cold, pure fear. She wasn't fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her survival. The Lockwoods' lawyers were a different kind of monster, a quiet, methodical evil that could ruin a person's life with a single, perfectly written legal motion. Elias was a soldier without a gun, and they had just brought a tank to the fight. She was in a battle she couldn't win, and the only way out was to find Dorian Nash and have him testify. Shelby had an idea, a risky one. They could release the audio anonymously to a competing news network to force a conversation and put public pressure on Thurston, but Anya shot the idea down immediately. "No, they'll just say it's a fake. The court of public opinion is useless without physical proof. We need to find Dorian Nash. We have to find him before they do, and before they make him disappear for good." Just then, Anya's phone buzzed with an alert. She read the screen, and her face went ashen. "Oh my God, she whispered, turning the phone to show Elias and Shelby. It was a news bulletin from Thurston Lockwood's press team, officially announcing his deep concern for his missing head of security, Dorian Nash. The bulletin claimed Nash had been fired for incompetence and was a known thief who had possibly stolen valuable items from the Lockwood residence on his way out. The news report showed a blurry picture of Dorian Nash and said that Thurston Lockwood was offering a reward for any information leading to his safe return. The Lockwoods weren't just covering up the crime. They were controlling the entire narrative, preemptively making Elias and the recording look like a desperate, malicious lie. The media narrative created by the Lockwoods was a brilliant, cold-blooded maneuver. It was designed to turn Dorian Nash into a common criminal and Elias into an accomplice, trying to exploit the situation for a bigger payoff. It painted a picture of a wronged, concerned father, Thurston Lockwood, instead of a heartless tyrant. Elias felt a knot of rage tighten in her stomach. They weren't just fighting her. They were fighting the truth itself, using money to build a different reality. Just as the news report was ending, two police officers walked into the coffee shop. They weren't there for a friendly chat. They were there because of the missing persons report, and they had been tipped off that Elias was the last person to have seen Dorian Nash, a lie orchestrated by the Lockwoods. Elias was taken to the precinct for questioning, the pill bottle and the recorder now safely in Anya's possession. The interrogation was long and grueling. The officers, a clean-cut man named Detective Miller and a sharp woman named Detective Evans, took turns grilling her. Miller was aggressive, hinting that she was holding Dorian for ransom. Evans was quieter, watching Elias's every expression, looking for something her partner was missing. Elias held her ground, repeating the truth about the drowning and the assault. She talked about the pill bottle and the recording. When she finished, Miller just laughed. A waitress with a secret recording of a billionaire? A convenient narrative. What's your price? But Detective Evans just looked at Elias, her eyes holding a deeper curiosity. When Miller left the room for a moment, Evans leaned in just a little, her voice barely a whisper. "We got a call from an anonymous source. Someone saw a black van with tinted windows leaving the Lockwood estate after dark the day of the incident. Not a Lockwood vehicle. They're looking for him too. Be careful. They're not just trying to make you look bad. They're trying to find Dorian before you do." Elias left the precinct feeling a new, chilling kind of fear. Not only was Thurston looking for Dorian, but now someone else was too, and they had been tipped off about her involvement. She rushed home, her mind a frantic mess of possibilities, her only goal now to make sure Jude was safe. She had left him with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman who had been a second grandmother to them, but the threat from Thurston Lockwood's phone call rang in her ears. As she turned the key in the lock, her heart stopped. The front door was ajar. A single, thin line of light was visible from the crack, and a cold draft of air rushed out to meet her. Elias's body went rigid. She pushed the door open, a silent scream of dread caught in her throat. The apartment was a mess. Drawers were pulled out, and furniture was overturned. They hadn't stolen anything. They were looking for something. She ran into the kitchen, a sense of deep, gut-wrenching terror gripping her. She had left her old, beat-up laptop on the counter, and it was now flipped open, the screen blank. But on top of the laptop, something lay perfectly still and perfectly arranged. It was a photograph of her younger brother, Jude, taken just yesterday. He was on the school playground, laughing, oblivious to the camera that had been tracking his movements. There was no mistaking the message. They knew where Jude was, and they were watching him. The fear was a cold, sharp blade. It cut through her anger and her determination, leaving her a panicked mess. The photograph of Jude was more effective than any legal document or phone call. It was a threat that wasn't about money or reputation. It was about the one thing she couldn't afford to lose. The message was clear. Drop everything, disappear, or her little brother will be the next victim of the Lockwoods' ruthless quest for control. Elias grabbed Jude from Mrs. Henderson's, not bothering to explain, and drove them to the one place she knew they would be safe, a dusty, abandoned trailer hidden in the woods on the outskirts of town. It was her late grandfather's old hunting trailer, a place so remote and forgotten that it was completely off the grid. It was a low point, a complete surrender of her normal life for the sake of survival. For a moment, she considered forgetting the whole thing, leaving the city, and starting over somewhere else. But the anger, the righteous fury, returned. She couldn't run forever. She couldn't let them win. Lying on the worn sofa in the silent trailer, she thought about the clues she had. The map from Silas, the groundskeeper. The missing persons report for Dorian Nash. The black van. The clues didn't add up to a simple narrative of a guilty billionaire. It felt more like a chess game with multiple players she couldn't see. Just then, her phone, which she had been keeping in airplane mode, rang with a blocked number. She hesitated, but something told her to answer. The voice on the other end was old, raspy, but familiar. It was Isaac, her father's old friend, a retired handyman who had spent decades working on the Lockwood estate. He had heard about the lawsuit and the scandal and called to offer his support. He had a deep, hidden knowledge of the Lockwood secrets. He told her that the family had been in quiet chaos for years, especially Thurston and his wife, Cordelia. Their marriage was a sham, a business arrangement held together by money and secrets. Isaac was the one who had built all the hidden things in the estate: secret doors, soundproofed walls, and hidden compartments for valuable art. He was the only person who knew the true layout of a Lockwood mansion. He confirmed the existence of a hidden room. Thurston had a small, soundproofed room built years ago. Isaac whispered on the phone, his voice filled with urgency. Said it was for sensitive business meetings. It's remote, in the service quarters, near the wine cellar. There's no ventilation, no windows, nothing. He used it as a panic room and a place to conduct business with a certain kind of people. The only way in is a special key, a specific design I only made one of. No one else has it, not even the staff. Elias's heart raced. A soundproofed room. That was where Dorian was. He wasn't dead. He was being held captive, locked inside that room. This was not a bluff. This was a real-life kidnapping, and her recording was proof. Isaac told her that the key was the most important thing. It wasn't just a simple key. It was a specially crafted one that could open the hidden door from the outside, but it could only be held by a trusted inner circle. He told her the last person he saw with that key was Cordelia Lockwood, and that she held all the real secrets, all the real power in the house. The next morning, Elias had a new plan. She and Isaac were going to break into the Lockwood estate. Isaac would use his old knowledge of the security and service tunnels to get her past the main gates. She wouldn't be looking for evidence or a fight. She would be looking for the key, and then she would find Dorian and release him. It was an impossible plan, a fool's errand, but it was the only shot they had to prove the truth and to stop Thurston's reign of terror for good. As they were finalizing their plan over the phone, Elias's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Shelby, the reporter. Shelby had been working tirelessly on the case, using her sources to find out everything she could about the Lockwoods. The text was short and to the point. I found out where the key is. It's with Cordelia. But listen to this. She's not with Thurston anymore. She's meeting with her divorce lawyer this morning. She's trying to leave him, and she's looking for leverage. She might be our best ally. Elias felt a moment of pure, blinding hope. Cordelia, the woman who had looked at her with such cold disdain, was secretly a prisoner in her own gilded cage, and she was fighting to get out. Could it be that she was as much of a victim as Dorian? This shifted the entire dynamic of the story. Maybe she was not the villain, but a desperate woman trying to escape a marriage to a truly terrible man. This was the opening they needed. Isaac, however, was not convinced. You can't trust the Lockwood, he said, his voice hard. They play their own games. You go in there, you get that key, and you get out. Don't talk to her. Don't look at her. His words were a sobering reminder that this was not a game. This was a place where people's lives were used as pawns in a much bigger, much more dangerous conflict. Elias had to be careful, but she knew she had to take a chance. As night fell, Elias slipped into the estate using the old service entrance Isaac had shown her, a path hidden by overgrown hedges and years of neglect. The air was thick and heavy, and she moved like a ghost, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. She was deep in the service corridors, a world away from the main mansion, a world the rich never saw. She was close to the wine cellar, close to the hidden room. She saw them before they saw her. It wasn't Cordelia and her lawyer. It was Cordelia and a man. He was tall, with a limp, and his arm was in a sling. His face was a little thinner than in the picture, and he had a deep bruise on his cheek, but there was no mistaking him. It was Dorian Nash, alive and well, talking to Cordelia in hushed, urgent tones. But what they were saying made no sense, and the look in their eyes was not of a victim and a rescuer. And then she saw the third person. It was a man in an expensive suit, a man she didn't know. He wasn't a lawyer. He was the CEO of a rival banking firm, a firm that had been trying to buy out Thurston Lockwood's company for years. The conversation was not about divorce or escape. It was about stock prices and hostile takeovers. Elias listened, her world tilting on its axis, as Cordelia handed the rival the special key, and he turned to Dorian, saying, "You did your part. The accident was a perfect cover. Now we can finally use the lawsuit to leverage the takeover, and Thurston will lose everything." The air in the cold service corridor became impossibly thin. Elias felt her mind reel, trying to process the conspiracy unfolding before her. The entire thing, the near drowning, the missing persons report, the lawsuit, was all a carefully orchestrated plot by Cordelia Lockwood and Dorian Nash, with a rival CEO, to take down Thurston and seize control of his billion-dollar empire. The drowning was a planned event, a distraction, not an accident. Dorian wasn't a victim. He was a traitor, a pawn in a much bigger, more brutal game. This revelation shattered her entire understanding of the past week. The narrative she had been fighting, the story of a powerful, negligent father, was a lie. The real villains were the people she had been looking at as potential allies. Thurston was not the hero, but he wasn't the monster she thought he was either. He was a ruthless, unlikable man caught in a terrible web of betrayal. Elias had been an unwitting pawn, caught in the middle of a war between two greedy factions. She had to make a choice: her life, her brother's future, and her own integrity. She could expose Cordelia and Dorian, a move that would not only prove her innocence, but also completely destroy Thurston's company and his reputation in the process. Or she could use her newfound knowledge for a more tactical advantage, maybe a way to force a deal with Thurston to ensure her safety. She felt a deep, profound sorrow and anger at the betrayal. She had risked everything for a narrative that was completely, utterly false. The trio finished their conversation, sharing a round of cold, satisfied smiles. Cordelia and Dorian shook hands with the CEO, a silent pact sealed in the cold, dusty air of the servants' quarters. Cordelia pulled her phone out, a small, triumphant smile on her face. "He's on his way. I've sent him a text from an anonymous number. I told him I had a lead on the missing key, and I've been able to secure it. He thinks he's getting a hero's welcome, but he's really just walking into a trap." Elias watched, frozen in place, as the distant, low hum of a luxury car's engine grew louder and louder. It was Thurston's car, and he was coming home. He wasn't just coming to find the key. He was coming to confront his wife, to find out where she had been all night. He had somehow found out about her betrayal, just not the full extent of it. The truth was about to collide with a violent, terrifying force. A single thought flashed through Elias's mind, a horrifying, terrible truth. Thurston wasn't coming home to talk. He was coming home for revenge. And the three people in the room, Cordelia, Dorian, and the CEO, had no idea she was there, a silent witness to their entire conspiracy. And now, she was trapped in a room with them, with a man who was about to lose everything coming right for her. Elias held her breath as the garage door rumbled open, realizing she was standing face to face with the true masterminds of the plot, and they had just locked themselves in a box with an animal they had enraged. If you're loving this story so far, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. So, what do you do when the villain you've been fighting turns out to be a pawn in a much bigger game? The answer, for Elias, was to not move, to hold her breath, and to watch the horrifying scene unfold before her eyes. Thurston Lockwood, a man so powerful he had his own private security, was about to be betrayed by his own family. The car's engine rumbled to a stop just outside the service corridor, and in walked Thurston, his face a mask of furious betrayal. He didn't even notice Elias hiding in the shadows. He saw only his wife, a man he recognized as Sterling Vance, a business rival, and his security guard, Dorian. Thurston's voice was low and dangerous. "What is the meaning of this, Cordelia?" he asked, his eyes darting from his wife to the rival CEO. Cordelia's face, usually so composed, was filled with a desperate, venomous hate. "It's the end of your empire, Thurston. This is the end of everything you took from me." She had a cold, calculated rage that made the last week's anger feel like a child's tantrum. Sterling Vance, the rival CEO, just smirked, holding the key up like a trophy. "This key opens a door you never knew existed, Thurston. A door to a new life for Cordelia and a new beginning for me. And Dorian here, he was just doing what he was paid for." The confession was a slap in the face. Elias felt a wave of nausea. She had almost lost her brother, her education, her entire life for a lie. Her fury, which had been directed at Thurston, now turned toward the true architects of the plot. She was just an unfortunate accident, a loose end to be tied up. The thought of them getting away with it, of using her and her family as props in their sick game, filled her with a new, icy determination. She had to act. She had the pill bottle and the recorder in her pocket, the only things that could save her now. She had to expose the real criminals, even if it meant allying with a man who had tried to ruin her. She took a deep breath, and, as Thurston took a step towards Sterling, a physical struggle began. Sterling swung at Thurston, who stumbled back into a stack of old wine barrels. The noise was loud and chaotic, and Cordelia just watched, her hands on her mouth, a silent gasp of shock. In the brief moment of chaos, Elias chose her side. She stepped out of the shadows and threw the pill bottle and the recorder to the floor at Thurston's feet. "Dorian was drugged. Thurston," she shouted, her voice echoing in the cold, stone corridor. "It wasn't an accident. They set it all up." The three conspirators stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide with shock. Thurston, momentarily stunned, stared down at the items, then at Elias, his expression unreadable, a question in his eyes. Thurston's reaction was not what Elias expected. He didn't yell. He didn't get angry. Instead, he just knelt down, his face pale, and picked up the recorder and the pill bottle. He looked at them for a long, silent moment. The mask of the powerful billionaire, the man she had despised, fell away, revealing a desperate, betrayed man. He understood. He had been so blind, so caught up in his own world, that he never saw the knives coming. His entire life was a lie, and he had been outplayed by his own wife. The fight stopped. Cordelia, Sterling, and Dorian, realizing their conspiracy had just been exposed, didn't bother to stay. They ran, a blur of panic and defeat, leaving Thurston and Elias alone in the cold corridor. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, Thurston finally spoke, his voice quiet and hoarse. "The key," he said, not to Elias, but to himself. "They have the key to my company's data. They were going to use the lawsuit as a distraction. They were going to steal all my clients, my life's work, everything." He explained the deeper conspiracy to Elias, a torrent of information rushing from his mouth. He hadn't just been a cold, unfeeling father. He had been a man on the brink of ruin. He had been quietly working to uncover the conspiracy, but his efforts were misinterpreted by the media as him simply being an angry, arrogant man. He had already fired Dorian, but he had no idea that Dorian was working with Sterling Vance, the rival CEO, and that Cordelia was the true mastermind. Elias had been a witness, a pawn in a game she knew nothing about. She had been right to trust her instincts, but she had been wrong about the true villain. The near drowning of the kids was a setup, a planned distraction, also that Dorian could get to a private server and download the sensitive data while everyone was distracted. It was a cold, calculated move, a perfect crime. "They're going to the office," Thurston said, his eyes filled with a new kind of terror. "The key they took from my office opens a backdoor to the main server. They'll download everything. My company, my life's work, everything will be gone by dawn. Elias realized they had to go to the company's headquarters, a high-tech skyscraper in the heart of the city, and stop them. The lawsuit, the police, everything was secondary. It was a race against time, and they had no idea where the rival CEO was or how to stop them. Thurston pulled out his phone, his face a new kind of determined. "The van," he said, looking at Elias. "Do you have any idea about the van?" Elias was confused. "I don't know. The police found it, but I don't know what they found inside." Thurston nodded grimly. "I have a contact in the police force. They'll tell me what they found. I'll make a phone call. We're getting a ride, and we're going to the office. We have a limited window before they get there. The problem is they have a key to the data, and all we have is a pill bottle and a recording. It's a race against time, and we're starting from a very long way behind." The drive to the city was tense and silent. Thurston was all business, a different kind of monster. He was no longer the arrogant, furious man from the pool. He was a professional, barking orders into his phone, his mind a whirlwind of business strategy and high-stakes legal maneuvers. He barely acknowledged Elias, a quiet presence in the back of the car. It was a stark reminder of who he really was. He hadn't changed. He was simply in survival mode. Elias's phone rang, and the familiar name of Detective Evans flashed on the screen. Elias answered, and Evans's voice was a low whisper. "We found the van. It's a surveillance van. It's a full-on operation. They were tracking the Lockwoods for weeks." Elias relayed the information, and Evans, in turn, told her that they were closing in on a lead. They were just waiting on the search warrant to get into Sterling Vance's office. "The lawsuit," Elias whispered, "you have to know it's a fake. It's a cover-up for a hostile takeover." Evans didn't say anything, but Elias could hear a quiet acknowledgement in her voice. "We're watching the office," Evans said. "We're waiting for the warrant. We can't do anything yet." Elias hung up, a sense of cold dread in her stomach. The police were one step behind, waiting on a piece of paper while the conspirators were likely already inside. Anya, the pro bono lawyer, called next, her voice full of a new, urgent knowledge. "I found it, Elias," she said, her voice a little breathless. "I found the real motivation behind all of this." She explained that she had been digging into Sterling Vance's past, looking for a motive, and she found it. Vance wasn't just a business rival. He was Cordelia's first love, a college sweetheart who had been a struggling business student when Thurston, already a wealthy heir, came in and stole her away. The entire plot wasn't just about money. It was also about a second chance, about a life she felt was stolen from her. This was not a story of greed. This was a story of revenge and a cold, terrible heartbreak, a tragic romance turned into a conspiracy. The knowledge hit Elias with a wave of sickening understanding. It wasn't about her, or even about the children. It was about a woman who had given up her dreams and her first love for a life of luxury, and then realized it wasn't enough. The car screeched to a halt in front of a towering skyscraper, Thurston's corporate headquarters. It was dark and silent, a sleeping giant in the middle of the city. But Elias knew, deep in her bones, that inside, the clock was ticking, and a final confrontation was just moments away. She took a deep breath, looking at the building, knowing she was about to walk into a final showdown that wasn't about a lawsuit or a kidnapping, but about a 20-year-old burning secret. They entered the building through a Secret Service entrance, the air-conditioned lobby a cold, sterile tomb. The usual security cameras and sensors were disabled, and the front door was unlocked. It was eerie, like walking into a house where a robbery was in progress. They moved like ghosts, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They found the main office, and the sight was enough to make Elias gasp. It was a disaster, papers and files thrown everywhere, the expensive furniture overturned. Thurston walked through the office, a grim look on his face. "They're trying to find something," he muttered, his voice cold and hard. "They're looking for a physical key, a password, something they didn't get from the key to the server." They followed the trail of destruction to the main server room, and Elias noticed something strange, something that Thurston missed. A tiny, almost invisible security camera in the corner of the room was still recording, its tiny red light blinking steadily, a silent witness to everything that was happening. They saw them through the small, reinforced window of the server room. Cordelia, Sterling, and Dorian, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the computer monitors. Sterling was typing furiously, his fingers a blur, while Cordelia and Dorian watched. They had the hard drive, and they were trying to copy the most sensitive information. This was it, the final showdown, the last battle. Thurston didn't wait. He used a special code on a side panel to bypass the security, and the door hissed open. "Get out of my office," he bellowed, his voice filled with a powerful, primal rage. The three turned, their eyes wide with shock and fury. "I was only trying to get back what you took from me," Sterling Vance yelled, his voice laced with a deep, bitter resentment. "You stole her from me, and you've been living a lie ever since." The truth, a final, painful piece of the puzzle, hung in the air between them. This wasn't about greed anymore. This was about a broken heart and a life that was lived with the wrong person. It was about love, hate, and a violent, desperate need for a second chance. And just as Thurston made a move to stop Sterling, a final betrayal unfolded. Dorian Nash, the seemingly loyal pawn, pulled out a small, black pistol and aimed it straight at Elias's head. "Don't move," he said, his voice flat and cold. "This ends now." The world went silent. The sound of the typing on the keyboard, the muffled shouts from the rival CEO, all of it faded into a dull hum. The only thing that mattered was the gun pointed at Elias's head. Dorian wasn't just a security guard. He was a hired mercenary, a professional who had been paid to do a job, and his job was to clean up the mess. And the mess was a little waitress who knew too much. He had a cold, empty look in his eyes, a finality that made Elias's heart stop. In that moment of suspended reality, a new wave of fear washed over Elias, colder and sharper than anything she had ever felt. The gun wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. She was going to die, and her brother, Jude, would be left all alone. Just as she was about to close her eyes, something happened. Thurston, a man she had considered a monster, stepped in front of her. He put his own body between her and the barrel of the gun. He wasn't doing it out of kindness. He was doing it out of pure, cold self-interest. She was his only witness, his only way out of this conspiracy, and he was not going to let her die. "Don't do it, Dorian," Thurston said, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "I'll give you double. I'll make you a rich man. Just drop the gun." But Dorian didn't listen. His loyalty wasn't to Thurston. It was to the money, and the money had already been paid. A siren wailed in the distance, getting louder and louder, a beacon of hope in the dark. The police were close. Shelby had come through. The conspirators were frantic. Sterling screamed at Cordelia to finish the hack, to get the information and get out before they were caught. Cordelia, a woman caught between a business deal and a past love, had a sudden change of heart. She looked at Thurston, at the man she had been trying to ruin for 2 decades, and she looked at the gun pointed at Elias. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she made her final ultimate move. She didn't finish the hack. She grabbed a hard drive from the desk, a decoy, and threw it across the room. "It's a trap," she screamed at Dorian and Sterling. "The hard drive is a fake. Thurston knows about the hack." She then ran towards Elias, reaching in her pocket and pulling out a second hard drive, a small, black thing, and she shoved it into Elias's hands. It wasn't Thurston's data. It was her own. It was a complete and utter betrayal of her co-conspirators. This was a digital copy of all of Thurston's assets and a detailed plan to ruin him. But it was also the key to Cordelia's freedom, and she just handed it to Elias, ensuring she would never have to live under anyone's thumb again. If you're loving this story so far, smash that like button and let us know with a fire emoji in the comments. So, Cordelia, the woman who had plotted to ruin her husband and steal his empire, had suddenly flipped, sacrificing her own plan to save Elias. Why? Because the sight of her husband, Thurston, protecting a stranger, a waitress, from a bullet, finally shattered the decades of cold resentment she had built up. It was a moment of pure, raw humanity. Cordelia's betrayal of Sterling and Dorian was her final move, her last bid for a clean slate, handing Elias the most powerful weapon in the world, the truth about everything. The arrival of the police was a roar of sirens and flashing lights. Dorian, seeing the lights, panicked. He fired, but he didn't aim at Elias. He aimed at the server rack, shattering the computers and plunging the room into darkness. Sterling Vance, the rival CEO, took advantage of the chaos, scrambling for the exit, but Thurston, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, tackled him. They wrestled on the floor, two titans of industry fighting like street brawlers. Elias, still clutching the hard drive Cordelia had given her, didn't wait. The smoke from the explosion filled the room, and she saw Cordelia running toward a service elevator, her escape route. Elias knew she had to get out, but she couldn't leave Thurston alone with the two conspirators. She didn't want to save him, but she needed him to be a witness for her. The police were seconds away from bursting through the door, and she needed the police to find the whole scene intact. She pulled out her phone and started recording the sounds of the struggle, the grunts, the shouts, the crashing of furniture. A perfect audio record of the final moments. This was the moment of ultimate chaos, the high point of the conflict. The door to the server room exploded inward, and a flood of uniformed police officers poured into the room, led by Detective Evans. The fight instantly stopped, and the three men, Thurston, Sterling, and Dorian, were quickly cuffed. Detective Evans spotted Elias in the darkness, her face streaked with soot, clutching the hard drive. "Elias, are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with relief. "I have the evidence, Detective," Elias whispered, holding up the hard drive. "Cordelia gave it to me. It has everything, the full plan, the takeover, the real reason the kids were almost drowned. This single piece of evidence, given to her in a moment of desperate panic, had just flipped the script. The subsequent hours were a blur of cold precinct lights, long statements, and the gradual, slow unspooling of the entire conspiracy. The low point was the questioning of Cordelia Lockwood. She was found hiding in the basement garage, waiting for her divorce lawyer, and she broke down completely. She confessed to everything: the affair with Sterling Vance, the plan to use the near drowning as a distraction, and the calculated risk of destroying her husband's career to gain her freedom. She revealed that the key Sterling held didn't just open a door. It granted access to a shell corporation used by Thurston for ethically dubious but legal transactions. Cordelia's motive was not just revenge. It was also self-preservation. She knew Thurston was close to being exposed for insider trading, and she used the hostile takeover as her exit strategy, planning to cash out before his empire collapsed. She was just as corrupt as Thurston, only smarter and more calculated. Elias watched the powerful woman confess, stripped of her dignity, and felt a quiet, profound pity. Cordelia had everything: wealth, beauty, status, but she was ultimately caged by her own ambition and her husband's dark secrets. Her heartbreak wasn't just a narrative. It was real, a corrosive force that led her to commit crimes. This reminded Elias that money doesn't solve everything. It often just creates bigger, more complicated problems. The evidence Elias provided, the pill bottle, the audio recording, and the final hard drive, was airtight. Dorian Ash was charged with attempted murder and kidnapping. Sterling Vance was charged with corporate espionage and conspiracy. Cordelia was charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The powerful world of the Lockwoods was collapsing like a house of cards. Thurston Lockwood, the man who had tried to ruin Elias, was released, but his freedom was conditional. The hard drive Cordelia gave Elias contained enough information about Thurston's financial misconduct to ensure he would face civil penalties and the complete dissolution of his company. He was ruined, but he was alive, and his children were safe. He approached Elias in the hallway, his face drawn and tired. He didn't offer an apology. He offered a deal, a final, cold transaction. He would drop the defamation lawsuit, publicly clear her name, and provide a full, untraceable scholarship for her medical school and Jude's education, covering every single expense for the rest of their lives. "It's not a thank you, Elias," he said, his eyes empty. "It's a debt. You saved my sons, and you gave me the evidence to destroy my enemies. You are the only clean thing left in my life. Take the money, take your life, and disappear." Elias didn't take long to think. She accepted the deal. It wasn't about forgiveness or a clean conscience. It was about stability for Jude, the one thing she had sacrificed everything for. The settlement was massive, enough to secure their future forever, all handled quietly through Anya Sharma, the lawyer. Elias didn't take a penny more than she needed to guarantee their education and housing. The rest she used to fund a new legal aid scholarship for students who had to fight injustice. The less extreme event was the beautiful, quiet moment when she told Jude. She sat him down, not at the old kitchen table in the cramped apartment, but in a small park near their new, clean, and safe home. She told him that she no longer had to work 3 jobs, that she could finally focus on her studies, and that he would never have to worry about school again. His small, bright smile, free from the worry she had unintentionally inflicted upon him, was the real payment, the true reward. Shelby Rourke, the reporter, broke the full story 3 days later. It wasn't just a news report. It was a bombshell documentary that shook the financial world. It exposed the rot at the core of the Lockwoods empire, the corporate espionage, the betrayal, and the shocking racism Elias had faced after saving the children. The article ended with a long paragraph about Elias, the waitress who saved 2 lives and took down a dynasty. Elias's life changed completely. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a legend, a symbol of fighting back against the impossible. She enrolled back in her pre-med program, and for the first time in her life, she felt the lightness of a life not weighted down by constant struggle. She worked hard, studied harder, and began volunteering at a local community clinic, preparing for the life she had always wanted. But the story wasn't over. There was one lingering, unsolved mystery. Cordelia had mentioned in her confession that Thurston was close to being exposed for insider trading, hinting at a secret hard drive he kept hidden somewhere in the country club. The initial investigation had only focused on the server room hack. Elias knew that for true justice to be served, Thurston, too, had to face the consequences of his own crimes. The mystery of Thurston's final secret kept Elias awake at night. She had the security and freedom she craved, but the knowledge that he still walked free, having only faced financial ruin but no criminal charges for his own past, felt incomplete. She knew she had to find that final piece of evidence, not for revenge, but for the principle of the thing. No one, not even a billionaire, should be above the law. She used a portion of the settlement to quietly hire a forensic investigator, a quiet woman named Marisol who specialized in digital recovery. Elias directed her to the Ocean Crest Country Club, specifically to the service quarters where she had first heard the argument and where Isaac, the groundskeeper, had mentioned a second, smaller, soundproof storage room. This room, Cordelia had hinted, was where Thurston kept his most sensitive, private business documents. Marisol worked for weeks, using blueprints and old building permits. The low point was when she reported back that the room was completely empty. Thurston had cleared it out immediately after the incident. Elias felt a wave of frustration. He had outsmarted them again, covering his last track. It felt like a defeat, a final, lingering piece of injustice. But Elias hadn't forgotten Isaac's map. She visited the groundskeeper, Silas, the man who had given her the clue to the first recording. She asked him about the soundproof room and the key. Silas shook his head. "Solo hay una llave maestra, Nina," he murmured. "Only one master key." He told her the key for the hidden service door was a specialized one. But the main key to the entire club's infrastructure was different, and only the oldest members had access to it. It was kept in a safe behind the oldest painting in the main dining hall. The key, Silas explained, didn't unlock a room. It unlocked a digital safe hidden in the wall, built for the club's original founders decades ago. It wasn't the kind of key an employee would have. It was a ceremonial key, a symbol of power. Elias realized that the true secret wasn't in a small safe. It was in the grand, public display of power. She had to break into the club one last time, not as a desperate waitress, but as a silent agent of justice. The final twist came not in a hidden room, but in the most public part of the club. Elias entered the ocean crest one final time, walking through the main doors, not the service entrance. It was late at night, and the club was silent. She walked past the spot where the children had nearly drowned, the place where her old life had ended and her new life began. She walked directly to the main dining hall, to the oldest painting of the original founder, a man with a cold, superior gaze. She found a ceremonial key, just as Silas had described. It was heavy, ornate, and tucked away behind the painting in a small, hidden lockbox. But the key didn't open a safe. It opened a tiny, digital compartment. Inside was a single, old-fashioned USB drive, labeled simply, The Crest. Elias drove straight to the police precinct. She handed the USB drive to Detective Evans. The drive contained a hidden ledger of 30 years of illegal financial transactions, insider trading, tax evasion, and money laundering, all linked directly to Thurston Lockwood and the club's founding members. It was a complete criminal history, the entire foundation of the elite world exposed. Thurston wasn't just a villain in a personal drama. He was the center of a massive criminal enterprise. The ending was poetic and powerful. The following morning, as Elias sat in her first lecture back at medical school, news broke that Thurston Lockwood had been arrested and charged with dozens of counts of serious financial crimes. The club itself was seized by federal authorities. The entire dynasty, built on greed and lies, was finally over, brought down by a former waitress. Elias looked down at her textbooks, realizing she hadn't just saved her brother. She had redeemed her own life and brought down an entire corrupt system. The full weight of the story, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the revenge, and the ultimate triumph of empathy and courage settled over her. She realized the real lesson wasn't about the fight she won, but about the choice she made. She chose to be a hero, not a victim, and her compassion was her greatest weapon. She had gotten her revenge, not by ruining him, but by simply forcing the truth into the light. The truth doesn't drown. If this story of betrayal, redemption, and turning the tables on the powerful gave you chills, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below. If you were Elias, would you have taken the money, or would you have sent Thurston to jail immediately? Tell me your move.